Before any great structure can rise to the sky, there must first be a plan hidden in the earth. Before there is a building, there are the schematics. For 2,000 years, the world has misunderstood the true nature of the ancient Hebrew texts. They look at the Old Testament, and they see only religion. They see rituals, robes, and rules. But an engineer looks at these same texts and sees something entirely different. They see a blueprint. We must begin our analysis with the Torah. In the modern world, the word Torah is often translated as law. This translation is a critical error. It is a linguistic failure that hides the true design. When modern ears hear the word law, they think of police, prisons, and burdens. They think of speed limits designed to slow you down, or authorities trying to control you. But in the world of engineering, a law is not a punishment. It is a necessity. Gravity is a law. Thermodynamics is a law. Structural integrity is a law. These are not arbitrary rules. They are the operating specifications of reality itself. The Torah was the original source code. It was downloaded into a chaotic world to create a pocket of order. Consider the ancient civilizations of Egypt or Babylon. They were built on power, tyranny, and the whim of kings. They were unstable structures destined to collapse under their own weight. But the Torah proposed a radical new architecture. It was a load-bearing framework designed to keep a society from imploding. The 613 commandments found in these scrolls were not random restrictions. They were maintenance protocols. When the text commands a day of rest, known as the Sabbath, it is not trying to bore you. It is a system recalibration to prevent mechanical failure in the human soul. When it speaks of dietary restrictions or ethical boundaries, it is outlining the safety parameters required to handle high-voltage spiritual energy. God did not give these instructions to make life difficult. He gave them because He is the architect, and He knows exactly how much weight the human frame can hold. This was the foundation. It was the bedrock. You cannot build a cathedral on a swamp, and you cannot build a holy faith on the shifting sands of emotion. You must build on the concrete of instructions. This is why the blueprint matters, because if you do not respect the structural integrity of the foundation, the entire building will eventually fall. This was the first phase of the Great Design. Once the blueprint was established, the architect required a physical interface, a place where the infinite could connect with the finite without destroying it. We call this structure the temple, but in the language of engineering, it was something far more complex. It was a machine. If the Torah was the software, the temple in Jerusalem was the hardware. It was a massive, intricate processing facility, designed for a specific function: atonement. In our modern world, we think of churches or synagogues as gathering places for community and song. But the ancient temple was not built for comfort. It was built for operation. It was a spiritual reactor designed to deal with the most dangerous problem in the universe: the corruption of the human heart. In any closed system, disorder increases over time. This is the law of entropy. In the spiritual realm, we call this disorder sin. Sin is not just a bad deed, it is a contamination. It is a virus that degrades the connection between the creator and the created. If left unchecked, this contamination would crash the system. So the temple was designed as the filtration unit. It was the mechanism installed to extract this toxicity and restore equilibrium. This is why the instructions for the temple were so terrifyingly precise. If you built it wrong, it didn't work. If you entered it incorrectly, you didn't just get kicked out, you died. This brings us to the operators. The priests of the tribe of Levi were not preachers in the way we understand them today. They were specialized technicians. They wore specific protective gear, the priestly vestments, and they followed a strict operational manual known as the Book of Leviticus. Their job was dangerous. They were handling high-voltage holiness in a dirty world. When a sacrifice was brought to the altar, it wasn't primitive magic, it was a transfer of cost. In engineering, you cannot get energy from nothing. Something must be consumed to produce power. The blood was the coolant. It was the life force required to cover the debt of the people. It was a life-for-life exchange. For centuries, this hardware ran continuously, morning and evening, smoke and fire. It was a heavy, industrial, and bloody system, but it worked. It kept the channel open. It allowed the presence of God to dwell in the midst of a broken humanity. But any engineer knows that hardware has limits. A physical machine, no matter how perfect, is confined to one location. The temple was the prototype, powerful and necessary, but the master architect already had plans for a massive upgrade. The hardware was about to become mobile. After centuries of operation, the hardware began to strain. The system was running, but the operators had become corrupt. The signal was getting noisy. The maintenance protocols of the Pharisees had become so complex that they were obscuring the original design. Then, at the precise moment in history, the chief architect arrived on the construction site. We know him as Jesus of Nazareth, but to understand his mission, we must stop seeing him merely as a gentle teacher walking through the hills. We must see him as the lead engineer conducting a site inspection. When he walked into Jerusalem, he did not walk in as a guest. He walked in with the authority of the one who drew the plans. The religious technicians of the day were terrified of him. Why? Because he didn't quote the manual like they did. He spoke like the one who wrote the manual. He looked at the structure they had built, and he immediately identified the structural failures. When he overturned the tables in the temple, it was not a temper tantrum. It was a system audit. He was clearing out the inefficiencies that were blocking the interface between God and man. But here lies the greatest misunderstanding in history. Many assumed that because he critiqued the operators, he was there to destroy the machine. They thought he came to tear up the blueprint and start over. He corrected this error immediately with a statement that is pure engineering. He said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. In construction, you do not abolish a blueprint. You execute it. A blueprint is only a piece of paper until the building stands. Once the building is finished, the blueprint is not destroyed, it is fulfilled. Its purpose is achieved." Jesus was saying that the Torah was the shadow, and he was the substance. He was the structure the text had been describing all along. He was the pivot point of the entire project. He was the moment where the project shifted from the planning phase to the execution phase. He proved that the system could run perfectly by living a life of total structural integrity, sinless, aligned, and flawless. He was the first human unit to run the Torah's operating system without a single error. He didn't come to delete the old code. He came to compile it, to render it, and to prepare the way for the greatest structural shift the world would ever see. The architect was about to become the cornerstone. The hardware was functional. The architect had arrived. But the system had one major limitation. It was external. The law was written on tablets of stone. It was like an operating manual that had to be read, memorized, and forced upon the user from the outside. You obeyed because you were told to obey. This is a manual override system. It works, but it creates friction. It requires constant external pressure to keep the machine running. So the architect initiated the massive system upgrade that the prophets had predicted centuries before. The prophet Jeremiah had seen the schematics for this. He wrote, "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts." Note the terminology. He did not say he would erase the law. He said he would relocate it. This is the shift from hardware to software. This is the difference between law and grace. In the old version, you didn't steal because a stone tablet said "do not steal." It was a command processed by your eyes and your fear. But in the new version, the grace upgrade, the code is installed directly into your central processor, the heart. You don't steal because the very desire to steal has been overwritten by a new nature. The output is the same, righteousness, but the operating system is completely different. This upgrade changed the interface from analog to digital. It moved the temple from a building in Jerusalem to the body of the believer. The Holy Spirit is the new operating system. It is an internal guidance chip that provides real-time feedback, correction, and power. This is where the engineering brilliance of the plan shines. Grace is not the absence of order. Grace is the automation of order. It is when the structural requirements of the blueprint are met, not by human effort, but by the power of the installed engine within. The heavy lifting is no longer done by the hands of the servant, but by the heart of the Son. The external scaffolding was removed, not because the building was abandoned, but because the internal steel frame was finally solid enough to stand on its own. The upgrade was live, the signal was broadcasting. For the first few decades, the system ran in perfect harmony. We often forget that the first Christians did not call themselves Christians. They were Jews. They were the original engineering team, users who held the Torah in one hand and the Messiah in the other. The interface was seamless, but then a compatibility error occurred. A massive influx of new users began to access the network. These were the Gentiles, people from the Roman nations who had no history with the blueprint, no knowledge of the Torah, and no physical hardware for the Jewish laws. This created a critical system conflict. The original team looked at these new users and asked, do they need to install the old drivers to run the new software? In other words, did a Greek need to become a Jew to follow Jesus? Did they need the circumcision, the diet, the rituals? The apostles, acting as the project managers, convened a crisis meeting in Jerusalem. They made a bold decision. The new users could run the Grace operating system without the heavy legacy hardware of the ceremonial law. It was a decision of pure engineering brilliance, optimizing for accessibility. But outside the leadership, the tension on the ground was too high. The structural stress became unmanageable. On one side, you had those who refused to believe the interface had changed. On the other, you had new believers who arrogantly wanted to delete the foundation entirely. Then, in the year 70 AD, the physical catastrophe hit. The Roman Empire destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. The hardware was smashed. In the chaos that followed, the single project fractured into two distinct entities, the parting of the ways. It was a catastrophic fork in the code. Judaism went one way, entrenching itself in the preservation of the text. Christianity went the other, distancing itself from its own roots to appeal to the Roman world. The engineering team had broken up. Instead of one unified structure, a Jewish foundation with a global superstructure, we ended up with two separate buildings, separated by a wall of hostility. The church forgot it was grafted in. The synagogue forgot it was meant to branch out. It was a glitch that would cost history dearly. The project was not cancelled, but for the next 2,000 years, it would run on a divided network. Despite the historical fracture, if you examine the user interface of both faiths today, you will find they are running the same legacy code. The labels have changed, but the mechanical actions remain eerily synchronized. It is like looking at two different computer screens connected to the same mainframe. Consider the protocol of initiation. In the Christian interface, a new believer enters the faith through baptism. They are submerged in water to signify the washing away of the old life and the beginning of the new. Most assume this was invented by the church. It was not. It is a direct continuation of the Jewish mikveh. For centuries before the church existed, the mikveh was the engineering standard for changing a person's status. If you touched the dead, or if a Gentile wanted to join the covenant, they had to be fully immersed in living water. It was a system reset. When John the Baptist was baptizing in the River Jordan, he wasn't inventing a new ritual. He was taking an ancient Jewish hardware process and repurposing it for the kingdom update. The function is identical: death to the old state, emergence into the new. Then we look at the central operating protocol of the Christian faith: communion, the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. Millions of believers consume the bread and the wine to remember the sacrifice of the architect. But this ritual was not designed in a vacuum. It was engineered directly on top of the Jewish Passover Seder. The Last Supper was a Passover meal. The bread Jesus held was the matzah, the unleavened bread of affliction. The wine was the cup of redemption, the third cup of the Seder ritual. When Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me," he was rewriting the code of the Passover. For 1,500 years, that meal had been pointing backward to the Exodus from Egypt. Jesus recalibrated the pointer. He turned the memory forward. He took the hardware of the Passover, which celebrated freedom from physical slavery, and upgraded it to celebrate freedom from spiritual slavery. When a Catholic priest lifts the host, or a Protestant breaks the bread, they are unknowingly executing a Jewish script. The interface has been translated, but the data structure remains intact. It is the same meal. It is the same God. It is the same logic of redemption, echoing through two different terminals. We have analyzed the blueprint, the hardware, the software, and the glitch. Now, we turn our eyes to the horizon to understand the final design. For 2,000 years, Judaism and Christianity have stood like two separate towers, constructed on opposite sides of a great canyon. To the casual observer, they appear to be two different cities, speaking two different languages, waiting for two different events. But this is an optical illusion caused by our position in time. It is a parallax error. If you stand at the drafting table of the master architect, you see that these two parallel lines are actually engineered to converge at a single point in the future. Both faiths are scanning the skies for the arrival of the Messiah. The discrepancy lies in the operational mode they are expecting. The Jewish system is calibrated to detect the frequency of the Lion of Judah. They are waiting for the Son of David, a conquering king who will restore physical order, rebuild the temple, and establish world peace. They are looking for the political engineer who fixes the structure of the world. The Christian system is calibrated to remember the Lamb of God. They are looking back at the suffering servant who fixed the internal structure of the soul, and they are looking forward to his return to finish the job. Here is the engineering brilliance of the final design. They are both right. The ancient Jewish sages, deep in the study of the blueprint, noticed a contradiction in the text. They saw prophecies of a Messiah who suffers and dies, and other prophecies of a Messiah who rules and reigns. To solve this engineering paradox, some propose there must be two Messiahs, Mashiach ben Joseph, who suffers, and Mashiach ben David, who rules. But the architect had a more elegant solution. It wasn't two different people, it was one person with two different mission phases. Phase 1 was the internal renovation, dealing with sin. This required the Lamb. Phase 2 is the external renovation, dealing with the world. This requires the Lion. The tragic glitch of history is that the Jewish people missed Phase 1 because they were too focused on the blueprint for Phase 2. And the Christian world often ignores the blueprint entirely, forgetting that the returning king is a Jewish rabbi. But the prophet Zechariah gives us the schematics for the reunion. He describes a moment when the glitch is finally patched. He writes that in that day, the inhabitants of Jerusalem will look upon me, whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him, as one mourns for an only son. This is the moment of convergence, the moment when the Jewish people realize that the king they have been waiting for has been the carpenter all along. And simultaneously, it is the moment when the church realizes that their savior is not a Roman statue, but the fulfillment of the Hebrew covenant. In the final chapters of the Bible, the book of Revelation, we see the completed project. We see a city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. And here is the most significant engineering detail of all. The text says, "I saw no temple in it." Why no temple? Because the hardware is no longer needed. The interface is no longer required. The separation between the creator and the created has been completely removed. The law is no longer written on stone or even just in the heart. It is the very atmosphere of the new reality. The signal is clear. The connection is permanent. This is the goal of sacred path engineering. We do not study the roots of Judaism just to be smarter or to learn history. We study the blueprint because you cannot fully love the building if you do not respect the foundation. We study the Torah to understand the mind of the architect. And when we do, we realize that the path was never accidental. It was engineered from the very first scroll to the final trumpet to bring us home.